Chapter 3. The Tragedy of Burlstone. Now for a moment, I will leave to remove my insignificant personality to describe events which occurred before we arrived upon the scene. By the light of knowledge which came to us afterwards. Apologies. Un momento. Only in the way can I make the reader appreciate the people concerned in the strange setting on which the fate was cast. The village of Burlstone is a small and very ancient cluster of half-timbered cottages on the northern border of the county of Sussex. For centuries, it had remained unchanged, but within the last few years, its picturesque appearance and the situation have attracted a number of well-to-do residents. Those villas peeped out from the woods. Around these woods were locally supposed to be the extreme fringe of the great wheel forest, which thins away until it reaches the northern chalk downs. A number of small shops have come into being to meet the wants of the increased population. So there seems to be some prospect that Burlstone may soon grow from an ancient village into a modern town. It is the center for a considerable area of the county, since Tunbridge Wells, the nearest place of importance, is 10 or 12 miles to the eastward over the borders of Kent. About half a mile from the town, standing in an old park famous for its huge beech trees, is the ancient manor hall of Brimstone. Part of this honorable building dates back to the time of the First Crusade, when Hugo de Capus built a fortress in the center of the estate, which had been granted to him by the Red King. This was destroyed by fire in 1543. And some of the smoke-black cornerstones were used when, in Jacobean times, to brick a country house. Rose upon the ruins of the feudal castle. The manor house, with its many gables and its small diamond-paned windows, was still much the builder had left in the early 17th century of the double moats which had guarded its more warlike predecessor. The elder had been allowed to dry up the several of the humble functions of the kitchen garden. The inner one still there, lay 40 feet beneath, though now only in a few feet in depth around the whole house. A small stream fed it and continued beyond it, so that the sheer of water, though turbid, was never ditch-like or unhealthy. The ground floor windows were within a foot of the surface of the water. The only approach to the house was over a drawbridge, the chains and windlash of which had been long rusted and broken. The latest tenants of the manor house had, however, with characteristic energy, set this right. And its drawbridge was not only capable of being raised, but actually was raised every morning and lowered every morning. By thus renewing the custom of the old feudal days, the manor house was converted into an island during the night. A fact which had a very direct bearing upon the mystery which was soon to engage the attention of all of England. The house had been untenanted for some years and was starting to molder into a picturesque cave when the Douglases took possession of it. This family consisted of only two individuals, John Douglas and his wife. Douglas was a remarkable man in both character and in person. In age he may have been about 50, with a strong-jawed, rugged face and a grizzling mustache. Particularly keen gray eyes and a wiry, vigorous figure which had lost nothing of the strength and the activity of youth. He was cheery and genial to all, but somewhat offhand in his manners, giving the impression that he had seen life in social strata of far lower horizons than the county society of Sussex. Yet though looked at with some curiosity and reserved by his more cultivated neighbors. He soon acquired a great popularity among the villagers. Apologies. Subscribing handsomely to all local objects and attending their smoking concerts and other functions were having a remarkably rich tenor voice. He was always ready to oblige with the next song. He appeared to have plenty of money, which was said to have been gained in the California gold fields. And it was clear from his own talk that of his wife that he had spent part of his life in America. Good impressions, which had been produced by his generosity and by the democratic manners which increased by reputation gained for the utter indifference to danger. Though a wretched rider, he turned out at every meet and took the most amazing falls in his determination to hold his own with the best. When the vicarage caught fire, he distinguished himself also by the fearlessness of which he re-entered the building to save property, after the local fire brigade had given up as impossible. Thus it came about that John Douglas of the Manor House had within 5 years won himself quite the reputation in Burrowstone. His wife, too, was popular among those who had made her acquaintance, though after the English fashion, the callers upon a stranger who settled in the county was more. Introductions were few and far between. This mattered to the less to her, as she was retiring by disposition and very much absorbed to appearance in her husband and her domestic duties. It was known that she was an English lady who had met Mr. Douglas in London. He, being at the time a widower, she was a beautiful woman, tall, dark, and slender, some 20 years younger than her husband. A disparity which seemed in no wise to mar the contentment of their family life. It was marked sometimes, however, by those who knew the best, that confidence between the two did not appear to be complete, since the wife was either too reticent about her husband's past life, or else, as it seemed more likely that he was perfectly informed about it. It had also been noted that commented by a few observant people that the signs were sometimes of some nerve strain upon the part of Miss Douglas, and that it would display acute uneasiness if her absent husband should ever be particularly late in his return. On the quiet countryside, where all gossip is welcome, this weakness of the lady of the manor house did not pass without remark, and it bulked larger upon the people's memory when those events arose which gave it a very special significance. There was yet another individual whose residence under the roof was, it is true, only an intermittent one, but whose presence at the time of the strange happenings, which would now be narrated, brought his name prominently before the public. This was Cecil James Barker of Hales Lodge, Hampstead. Cecil Barker's tall, loose-jointed figure was a familiar one on the main street of Burrowstone Village, for he was frequent and welcome visitors at Manor House. He was more noticed as being the only friend of the past unknown life of Mr. Douglas, who had ever seen him in his new English surroundings. Barker himself, an undoubted Englishman, but by his remarks it was clear that he had first known Douglas in America, and there lived on intimate terms with him. He appeared to be a man of considerable wealth, and was reputed to be a bachelor. In the age, he was younger than his brother, Douglas, 45 at most. A tall, straight, broad-chested fellow with clean-shaved, prize-fighter face, thick, strong black eyebrows and a pair of masterful black eyes, which might, even without the aid of very capable hands, clear a way for him through a hostile crowd. He neither rode nor shot, but spent his days wandering around the old village with his pipe in his mouth, or driving with his host, or in his absence with his hostess over the beautiful countryside. An easygoing, free-handed gentleman. The Ames, the butler, but my word, I had rather not be the man that crossed him. He was corporal, intimate with Douglas, and he was no less friendly with his wife. A friendship which more than once seemed to cause some irritation to the husband, so that even the servants were able to perceive his annoyance. Such was the third person who was one of the family when the catastrophe occurred. As to the other citizens of the old building, it was a place out of a large household, not to mention a prim, respectable, capable Ames and Mr. Allen, a buxom and cheerful person, who relieved the lady of the sum of her household cares. The other 6 servants in the house bear no relations to the events of the night of January 6th. It was 11:45, and the first alarm reached the small local police station, in charge of Sergeant Wilson of the Sussex Constabulary. Cecil Buck, much excited, and rushed to the door and pealed fiercely upon the bell. A terrible tragedy occurred at the manor house, and John Douglas had been murdered. That was the breathless burden of his message, and he hurried back to the house, followed within a few minutes by the police sergeant, who arrived at the scene of the crime a little after 12 o'clock, after taking prompt steps to warn the county authorities something serious was afoot. On reaching the manor house, the sergeant had found the drawbridge down, the windows lighted up in the whole household in a state of wild confusion and alarm. The white-faced servants were huddling together in the hall, with the frightened butler wringing his hands in the doorway. Only Cecil Buck seemed to be the master of himself and his emotions. As he opened the door, was the nearest to the entrance, had beckoned the sergeant followed him. At the moment there arrived Dr. Wood, a brisk and capable general practitioner from the village. The 3 men entered the fatal room together, while the horror-stricken butler followed at their heels, closing the door behind to shut out terrible scene from the maid servants. The dead man lay on his back, sprawling with outstretched limbs in the center of the room. He was clad only in the pink dressing gown, which covered his night clothes. There were carpet slippers on his bare feet. The doctor knelt beside him and knelt down on the lamp which stood at the table. One glance at the victim was enough to show the healer's presence could be dispensed with. The man had been horribly injured. Laying across his chest was a curious weapon, a shotgun with the barrel sawed off, a foot in front of the triggers. It was clear that he had been fired at close range and then he had received the whole charge in the face, blowing his head almost into pieces. The triggers had been wired together to make the simultaneous discharge more destructive. The county policeman, unnerved and troubled by the tremendous responsibility yet coming so suddenly a problem upon him. "We shall touch nothing until my superior arrives," he said in a hushed voice, staring in the horror of the dreadful head. "Nothing has been touched up till now," said Cecile Barker. "I'll answer for that. You'll see it all as exactly as I found it." When was that? The sergeant drawn into his notebook. It was just 11:30. I had not begun to undress, and I was sitting by the fire in my bedroom when I heard the report. It was not very loud. It seemed to be muffled. I rushed down, and I don't suppose it was 30 seconds before I saw what was in the room. Was the door open? Yes, it was open. Poor Douglas was laying as you see him. His bedroom candle was burning on the table. It was I who lit the lamps minutes afterwards. Did you see? No one. No. I heard Miss Douglas coming down the stair behind me, and I rushed out to prevent her from seeing the dreadful sight. Miss Allen, the housekeeper, came and took her away, as had arrived, but he ran back to the room at once. But surely, I heard the drawbridge is kept up all night. Yes, it was up until I lowered it. Then could a murderer have gotten away? It is not out of the question. Mr. Douglas must have been shot himself. That was our first idea. But see, Barker drew aside the curtain and showed that the long diamond pane window was open to its full extent. And look at this. He held the lamp down and illuminated a smudge of blood, like the mark of a boot sole upon the windowsill. Someone stood there, getting out. You mean someone waited across the moat? Exactly. Then if you were in the room within a half a minute of the crime, it must have been in the water at that very moment. I have no doubt of it. I wish to heaven I had rushed to the window, but the curtain screened it, as you can see. So it never occurred to me. I heard the steps of Miss Douglas, and I could not let her into the room. It would have been too horrible. Horrible enough, said the doctor, looking at his shattered head where the terrible marks which surrounded it. I've never seen such injury since the Burlstone Railway smash. But I say, remarked the police sergeant, too slow. Bucolic common sense was still pondering at the open window. It is all very well. You're saying that a man escaped our waiting this moat. But what I ask you is, how did he ever get up to the house if all the bridge was up? That's the question, said Barker. At 1 o'clock was it raised? It was nearly 6 o'clock, said Ames, the butler. I've heard, said the sergeant, and that it was half usually raised at sunset. That when near half past 4, then 6 at this time of year. Miss Douglas had visitors tea. He said I couldn't raise it until they went, and then I wound it up myself. Then it comes to this, said the sergeant. If anyone comes from outside, if they did, they must have got across the bridge before 6 and been in hiding ever since. Until Miss Douglas came into her room after 11. That is so. Mr. Douglas went around the house every night, the last thing before he turned in to see that the lights were right. That brought him in here. The man was sitting and shot him. Then he got away through the window and left his gun behind him. That's how I read it, for nothing else fits the facts. The sergeant picked up a gun which lay beside the dead man on the floor. The initials VV, and under them the number 341 were rudely scrawled and inked upon it. What it is this? He asked, holding it up. Barker looked at it with curiosity. Never noticed it before, he said. The murderers left it behind. VV 341. I can make no sense of that. The sergeant kept turning it over in his big fingers. What's PV? Someone's initials, maybe. What have you got there, Dr. Wood? It was a good side hammer which had been lying on the rug in front of the fireplace. A substantial workmanlike hammer. Cecile pointed to a box of brass-headed nails upon the mantelpiece. Mr. Douglas was all to pictures yesterday, he said. I saw him myself standing upon that chair and fixing the big picture above it. That accounts for the hammer. We'd best put it back on the rug where we found it, said the sergeant, scratching his puzzled head in his perplexity. I want the best brains and the force to get to the bottom of this. It will be a London job before it's finished. He raised his hand to the left and walked slowly round the room. Hello, he cried, signaling out the window to a certain one side. 1 o'clock. Were these curtains drawn? When the lamps were lit, said Butler, it would be shortly after 4. Someone had been hiding here, sure enough. He held the light down, and the marks of muddy boots were visible in the corner. I'm about to say this bears out your theory, Mr. Barker. It looks like if the man got into the house at 4 when the curtains were drawn, and before 6 when the bridge was raised. He slipped into the room because it was first that he saw. There was no other place he could hide. So he popped him behind the curtain. That all seems clear enough. It is likely this man's idea was to burgle the house. But Mr. Douglas chanced to come upon him, so he murdered him and escaped. That's how I read it, said Mr. Barker. But, I say, aren't we wasting precious time? Couldn't we start out in Scotland's County before the fellow gets away? The sergeant considered for a moment. There are no trains before 6 in the morning, so he can't get away by rail. And if he goes by road with his legs all dripping, it's odd that someone will notice him. Anyhow, I can't leave myself here until I'm relieved. But I think none of you should go until we more clearly how we all stand. The doctor, taking the lamp and was narrowly scrutinizing the body. What's this mark? He asked. Could this have any connection with the crime? The dead man's arms was thrust out from below his dressing gown and exposed at high elbow, but halfway up the forearm was a curious brown design. Triangle inside a circle, standing out in vivid relief upon the lard-colored skin. It's not a tattoo, said the doctor, peering through his glasses. Never saw anything like it. The man had been branded at the time when they branded cattle. What's the meaning of this? I don't profess to know the meaning of it, said Cecil Baker, but I've seen the mark on Douglas many times the last 10 years. And so have I, said the butler. Many a time when the masters have rolled up his sleeves, I've noticed that very mark. I've often wondered what it could be. Then it has nothing to do with the crime anyhow, said the sergeant. But it's a rum thing, all the same. Everything about this case is rum. Well, what is it now? The butler had given an exclamation of astonishment when he was pointing at the dead man's outstretched hand. They've taken his wedding ring, he gasped. What? Yes, indeed. Master always wore his plain gold wedding ring on the little finger of his left hand. That ring was rough nugget on it was above it, and the twisted snake ring on the third finger. There's a nugget, and there's a snake. But the wedding ring is gone. He's right, said Barker. Do you tell me, said the sergeant, that the wedding ring was below the other? Always. Then the murderer, whoever it was, first took off the ring. You call it a nugget ring. Then the wedding ring, and afterward put the nugget ring back on. That is so. The worthy country policeman shook his head. Seems to me the sooner we get London on this case, the better. Said he. Wait, Mason is a smart man. No local job has ever been too much for that white Mason. It won't be long now before he is here to help us. But I expect we'll have to look to London before we are through. Anyhow, I'm not ashamed to say it's a deal too thick for the likes of me. Chapter 4 Darkness. At 3 in the morning, the Chief Sussex detective, obeying the urgent call from Sergeant Wilson of the Burlstone, arrived from headquarters in the light log car behind the breathless trotter. By 5:40 train in the morning, and sent a message to Scotland Yard, and he was at Burlstone Station at 12 o'clock to welcome us. White Mason was quiet, comfortable-looking person in a loose tweed suit, with clean-shaved, ruddy face, a stiffish body, and a powerful brandy leg adorned with gaiters, looking like a small farmer, a retired gamekeeper, or anything upon the earth except a very favorable specimen of the provincial crime officer. Real, downright snorter, Mr. MacDonald, he kept repeating. We'll have the pressmen down like flies when they understand it, and I'm hoping we will get our work done before they get poking their noses in and messing up all the trails. There have been nothing like this that I can remember. There are some bits, and that will come home to you, Mr. Holmes. Or am I mistaken? And you also, Dr. Watson. For the medicos, we'll have a word to say before we are finished. Your room is at the Westville Arms. There are no other place, but I hear that it's good, clean and good. The man will carry your bags. This way, gentlemen, if you please. He was a very bustling and genial person, the Sussex direct detective. In 10 minutes we had found all our quarters, and 10 more we were seated in the parlor of the inn, treated to a rapid sketch of those events which had been outlined in the previous chapter. MacDonald made occasion note, while Holmes sat absorbed, with the expression of surprised and reverent admiration which the butler surveyed the rare and precious bloom. Remarkable, said he, when the story was unfolded. Most remarkable. I can only recall any case where the features had been more particular. I thought you would say so, Mr. Holmes. And White Mason was in great delight. We're well up with the times in Sussex. I told you how matters were up to the time when I took over for the Sergeant Wilson between 3 and 4 this morning. My word, I made the old mare go. But I need not have so much a hurry. As it turned out, there was nothing immediate that I could do. Sergeant Wilson had all the facts. I checked them on and considered them and maybe added a few of my own. Where are they? Asked Holmes eagerly. Well, first, I had the hammer examined. There was Dr. Wood there to help me. Found no signs of violence upon it. I was hoping that if Douglas defended himself with the hammer, he might have left a mark upon the murder before he dropped it on the mat. But there was no stain. That, of course, proves nothing at all, remarked Inspector MacDonald. He has been many a hammer murderer, and no trace on the hammer. Quite so. It was to prove it wasn't yours, but there might have been stains. And that would have been helped us. As a matter of fact, there were none. I examined the gun. They were buckshot cartridges, and as Sergeant Wilson pointed out, the triggers were wired together so that if you pulled on one hinder, both barrels were discharged. Whoever fixed that had made up his mind that he was going to take no chances of missing his man. The sawed-off shotgun was not more than 2 feet long. One should carry it easily under one's coat. There was no fleet marker's name, but the printed letters P-E-N were fluttering between the barrels, and the rest of the name had been cut off by the saw. A big P with a flourish above it, E and N smaller, asked Holmes. Exactly. Pennsylvania Small Arms Company, well-known American firm, said Holmes. Wait, engaged a friend with a little villager practitioner looks at the Harley Street specialist who by a word can solve the difficulties that perplexed him. That is very helpful, Mr. Holmes. No doubt you are right. Wonderful. Do you carry the names of all gun makers in the world in your memory? Holmes dismissed the subject with a wave. No doubt it is American shotgun. White Mason continued. It seemed and read that a sawed-off shotgun is a weapon used in some parts of America. Apart from the name upon the barrel, the idea occurred to me. There's some kind of evidence then that this man who entered the house and killed the master was an American. MacDonald shook his head. Man was surely traveling over fast, he said. I have heard no evidence yet that the stranger was even in the house at all. The open window, the wood stood none still. The queer card, the mark of the box in the corner. The gun! Nothing there could have not been arranged. Mr. Douglas was an American, or had lived long in America. So had Mr. Barker. You don't need to be imported American from the outside in order to account for the American doings. Ames, the butler? What about him? Is he reliable? 10 years with Sir Charles Chandos, as solid as a rock. He has been with Douglas ever since he took the manor 5 years ago. He has never seen a gun of the sort in the house. The gun was made to conceal. That's why the barrels were sawed. It would fit into any box. How could he swear there was no such gun in the house? Well, anyhow, he had never seen one. MacDonald shook his obstinate Scottish head. I'm not convinced yet there was ever anyone in this house, said he. I'm asking you to consider. His accent became more Aberdonian as he locked himself with his argument. I'm asking you to consider. That involves your purpose that the gun was ever brought into the house, and that all the strange things were done by a person from outside. Oh man, it's just inconceivable. It's clean against common sense, I put it to you, Mr. Holmes, judging it by what we heard. Well, state your case, Mr. Mack, said Holmes in the most judicial style. The man is not a burglar, supposing that he ever existed. Doing business as a card point and premeditated murder for some private reason. Very good. He was a man who slips into a house with the deliberate intention of committing murder. He knows, if anything, that he will have a difficulty in making his escape. As soon as the house is surrounded with water, that the weapon would be choose, you would say the most silent in the world. Then you could hope, when the deed was done, to slip quickly from the window, to wait the moment to get away at his leisure. That is understandable, but it is also understandable if he should go out of his way to bring with him the most noisy weapon he could select, knowing he would well fetch every human being in the house to the spot as quick as they can run. And that is the odds that he will be seen before he can cross the moat. Is that credible, Mr. Holmes? Well, you put the case strongly. My friend replied thoughtfully. It certainly needs a good deal of justification. May I ask, Mr. White Mason, whether you examined the farther side of the road at once to see whether there were signs of men having climbed out of the water? There were no signs, Mr. Holmes, but it is a stone edge, and one could hardly expect them. No tracks or marks. None. Ha! There would be any objection, Mr. White Mason, to going down to our house at once. There may be possibly some small point which might be suggestive. I was going to propose it, Mr. Holmes, but I thought it well to just put in touch of all the facts before we go. I suppose if we should strike you. White Mason looked doubtfully at the amateur. I have worked with Mr. Holmes before, said Inspector MacDonald. He plays the game. My own idea of the game, at any rate, said Holmes with a smile. I go into the case to help the ends of justice in the work of the police. If I ever separate myself from the official force, it is because they first separated themselves from me. I have no wish to ever score at their expense at the same time. Mr. White Mason, I claim the right to work on my own and wish to give my results at my own time. Complete, rather, in stages. I am sure you are well honored by your presence to show that we know, said White Mason cordially. Come along, Dr. Watson. When the times come, we'll all hope for a place in your book. We walk down the quaint village street with a row of pollard elms on each side of it. Just beyond the two aging stone pillars, weathered, stained, and botched, buried upon their summits. A shapeless something which had once been the rampant lion of the Campus of Burlstone. A short walk along the winding drive, and such sward and oaks around it, as only one sees in the rural England. And then a sudden turn, and a long, low Jacobean house of the dingy, liver-colored brick lay before us, with an old-fashioned garden-cut views of either side of it. As we approached it, there was wooden drawbridge, and a beautiful broad moat, still luminous quicksilver in the cold winter sunshine. 3 centuries have flown past the old manor house, century of birth and of homecomings, centuries of fancies and the meeting of fox hunters. Strange now, in its old age. This dark business should have cast a shadow upon the venerable walls, and yet those strange peaked roofs and quaint overhung gables were as fit covering up the grim and terrible intrigue. As soon as I looked at the deep-set windows, the long swept of the dull-colored water-lamp front, I felt that no more fitting scene could be set to such tragedy. "That's the window," said White Mason. "One open on the immediate right of the drawbridge. It's open just as we found it last night. It looks rather narrow for a man to pass. Well, it isn't a fat man anyhow. We don't need your deductions, Mr. Holmes, to tell us that. But you or I could squeeze through it all right." Holmes watched the edge of the moat and looked across to examine the stone ledge and the grass border beyond it. "I've had a good look, Mr. Holmes," said White Mason. "There's nothing there, no sign that anyone has landed. But why should he leave any sign? Exactly. Why should he? Is the water always turbid? Generally about this color. The stream brings down the clay. How deep is it? About 2 feet each side, 3 in the middle. So we can put aside the idea of a man having been drowned in the crossing. No, a child could not be drowned in it. The walk across the drawbridge and were so omitted by a quaint, narrow-jawed person who was the butler. Ames. The poor old fellow was white and quivering in the shock. The village sergeant was a tall, formal, melancholy man who still held his vigils in the room of fate. The doctor departed. "Anything fresh, Sergeant Wilson?" asked White Mason. "No, sir." "Then you can go. You've had enough. We can send for you if you want. The butler had better wait outside. Tell him to warn Mr. Cecil Barker, Miss Douglas, and the housekeeper that we want a word with them presently. Now, perhaps, gentlemen, you will allow me to give you the views of form first, then be able to arrive at your own." He impressed me. This country specialist. He had a soul equipped to the fact and a cool, clear, common sense brain, which would take him some way in his profession. Holmes listened to him intently, with no sign that the impatience which the official exponent was too often produced. "It is suicide or is murder? That is our first question. Gentlemen, is it not? If it were suicide, then we have no belief that this man began by taking off his wedding ring and concealing it. And then he came down here in a dressing gown, put mud into a corner skirt behind the curtain, or give the idea that someone had waited for him, opened the window, put blood on them. We can surely dismiss that," said MacDonald. "So I think suicide is out of the question. And then a murder has been done. What we have determined is whether it was done by someone outside or inside the house. Well, let's hear the argument. There are considerable difficulties both ways, and yet one or the other it must be. We will suppose that first that some person or persons inside the house did the crime. They got this man down here at a time when everything was still, yet no one was asleep. Then they did the deed with the queerest and noisiest weapon in the world, so as to tell everyone what had happened. A weapon that has never been seen in the house before. Does not seem a very likely start, does it? No, it does not. Well then, everyone was agreed that after the alarm was given, only a minute at most had passed before the whole household, not even Mr. Cecil Baker alone. Though he claims he had been to the first, but Ames and all of them were on the spot. Do you tell me that in the time the guilty person managed to make footsteps in the corner, opening the window, marked the still blood, taped to the wedding ring off the dead man's finger, and all the rest of it? It's possible. Put it very clearly, said Holmes. I'm inclined to agree with you. Well then, we are driven back to the theory that it was done by someone from outside. We are still faced with some big difficulties. But anyhow, they ceased to be impossibilities. The man got to the house between 4:30 and 6, that is to say, between dusk and the time when the bridge was raised. There had been some visitors, and the door was open, so there was nothing to prevent him. He may have been a common burglar, or may have had some private grudge against Mr. Douglas. Since Mr. Douglas spent most of his time in America, and the shopman seems to be an American woman, it would seem that the private grudge is more like theory. He slipped into his room because it was the first he came to, and hid behind the right curtain. There he remained until past 11 at night. At that time, Mr. Douglas entered the room. It was a short interview, if there was any interview at all. For Mr. Douglas declares that her husband had not left for more than a few minutes when she heard the shot. The candle shows that, said Holmes. Exactly. The candle, which is a new one, not burned for more than half an inch, must have been placed on the table before he was attacked. Otherwise, of course, it would have fallen when he fell. This shows that he was not attacked the instant he entered the room. When Mr. Barker arrived, the candle was lit and the lamp was out. Well, that's all clear enough. Now we can reconstruct things to those lights. Mr. Douglas enters the room. He puts down the candle. A man peers behind the curtain. He is armed with his gun. Then the man in the wedding ring. Heaven knows why, but it must have been. Mr. Douglas gave it up. Then, either in cold blood or the course of a struggle, Douglas may have whipped the hammer. He was found upon the mat. He shot Douglas in this horrible way. Dropped his gun and also would have seen this queer car, VV-341. Whatever that may mean, and made escape to the window across the moat. And at this very moment when Cecil Baker was discovering the crime. How's that, Mr. Holmes? Very interesting, but just a little unconvincing. Man, it would be absolute nonsense if there was anything else. It would be even worse, cried MacDonald. Somebody killed a man, and whoever it was could clearly prove to you that it was done in some other way. What does it mean by allowing his retreat to cut off like that? What does it mean by using a shotgun when silence was his one chance of escape? Come, Mr. Holmes, something new to give us a lead, since you might say Mr. Waite's theory is unconvincing. Holmes had sat intently observing during this long discussion, missing no word that was said, with his keen eyes darting left to right, and his forehead wrinkled with speculations. I would like to know a few more facts before I get that far as a theory, Mr. Mac, said he, kneeling down beside the body. Dear me, these injuries really are appalling. Can we have the butler in for a moment, Ames? I understand you have often seen this very unusual mark, a brand of triangle with a circle upon Mr. Douglas's forearm. Frequently, sir. You never heard any speculation as to what it was? No, sir. It must have caused great pain while it was inflicted, and undoubtedly a burn. Now I observe Ames. The small piece of plaster in the angle of Mr. Douglas' jaws. Did you observe that knife? Yes, sir. Cut himself shaving yesterday morning. Do you ever know him to cut himself and shaving before? Not for a very long time, sir. Suggestive, said Holmes. It may, of course, be the mere coincidence, or maybe point to some nervousness which may indicate he had a reason to apprehend danger. Had you noticed anything else unusual in his conduct yesterday, Ames? It struck me that he was a little restless and excited, sir. It may not have been entirely unexpected. What do we seem to make a little progress? Do we not? Perhaps you would rather do the questioning, Mr. Mac. No, Mr. Holmes, it's better hands than mine. Well then, we will pass to this card, BV341. It's a rough card. Have you had any sort in the house? I don't think so. Holmes walked across the desk and dabbed a little ink from each bottle onto the blotting paper. It was not printed in this room, he said. This black ink in the other purplish. It was done by a thick pen, and these are fine. No, it was done elsewhere, I should say. Can you make anything of the inscription names? No, sir. Nothing. What do you think, Mr. Mac? Gives the impression of a secret society of some sort. The same with his badge upon the forearm. That's my idea too, said White Mason. Well, we can adopt it as a working hypothesis. And now, see how far difficulties disappear. An agent of a society who makes his way to the house and waits on Mr. Douglas. Blows his head nearly off with his weapon, and escapes by the waiting remote after leaving a card beside the dead man, which will mention in the papers tell other members of the society that vengeance had been done. That all hangs together. But why have this gun of all weapons? Exactly. And why the missing ring? Quite so. And why no rest? In the past. Past two now. I take it for granted that since dawn every constable within 40 miles have been looking out for a white stranger. That is so, Holmes. Well, unless he has a burrow close by, or a change of clothes ready, then we can hardly miss him. And yet, they have missed him up till now. Holmes had gone to the window and was examining it with his lens and the blood mark on the still. Just clearly the tread of a shoe. Remarkably broad, a splay foot, one would say. Curious, because so far one can trace any footmark in this mud-stained corner, one would have to say was more shapely sole. However, they are certainly very indistinct. That is under the side table. Mr. Douglas Dumbbell said Ames. Dumbbell was only one. Where's the other? I don't know, Holmes. There have been only one. I never noticed them for months. One dumbbell, Holmes said seriously, but his remarks were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. A tall, sunburned, capable-looking, clean-shaven man looked at us. I have no difficulty in guessing that it was Cecil Baker of whom I've heard. His masterful eyes traveled quickly, with a questioning glance from face to face. Sorry to interrupt your consultation, said he, but you should hear the latest news. An arrest? No such luck. But they found his bicycle. A fellow left his bicycle behind him. Come to have a look. Within 100 yards of the door hall. We found 3 or 4 grooms and idlers standing in the drive inspecting a bicycle which had been drawn out from the clump of evergreens, and which had been concealed. It was a well-used Rudsworth, splashed from a considerable journey that was saddlebagged with spanner and oil can, but no clue as to the owner. It will be grabbed out to the police, said the inspector, if these things were numbered and registered. But we must be thankful for what we've got. We can't find where he's went to, at least likely to get where he came from. But what in the name of it all is a wonderful maid this fellow leave it behind? And how in the world has he got away without it? We don't seem to get a gleam of light in the case, Mr. Holmes. No way, my friend answered thoughtfully.